Hi, guys. I wasn't going to read another chapter today, but now I've got to read another one because I'm kind of into the story too. So, the report card, Chapter 3 School and Stephen. Soon my mom was going to call me downstairs for dinner, and after dinner would come the reading of the grades, and then boom. My whole life was flashing in front of me like a report on the 6 o'clock news. Memories kept flooding in. I couldn't help it. And I realized that this explosion had been building up ever since I first went to school. Another fact from the memory files, I'd gotten off to a bad start in kindergarten. That's mostly because I spent my first 2 weeks at Philbrook Elementary School hiding under a table in Mrs. Bridges' room, pretending that I was a cat. I meowed and hissed, and at snack time I poured my milk into a plastic bowl I had brought from home. That was so I could lap up the milk with my tongue. I acted like a cat until 11:53 every day. Then I would get off, dust off my knees, put on my jacket, and get ready to ride the bus to my afternoon daycare. The cat business had started a month before kindergarten began. I had read this great article in National Geographic about leopards, and then I had learned everything else I could about cats, and I had decided that cats were amazing and wonderful. And I thought it'd be fun to see what it felt like to be a cat. That's where the idea came from. But the real reason I began being a cat at school was because I knew that if I started doing schoolwork in kindergarten, it would be too easy. Everyone would have thought I was too good at it. Being too good would have made me seem too different. It was so much easier to be different by being a cat. No one would suspect that a cat liked to read the Encyclopedia Britannica. No one would guess that a cat had memorized 38 of the poems in A Child's Garden of Verses. No one would suspect that a cat had taught herself to understand Spanish by watching the Univision channel. And no one would suspect that a cat was interested in maps and history and archaeology and astronomy and space travel and the Latin names for animals like Felis catus, the domestic cat. I was smart, but I didn't have much experience. I was still a 5-year-old kid. So I made a miscalculation because I thought that once everyone at school had gotten used to the idea that I was pretending to be a cat, they'd pretty much leave me alone. But of course, that wasn't the way it worked at school. Right away, Mrs. Bridge called my mom. My mom got upset, and then she told my dad, and he got upset. I've always loved my mom and dad, but they tend to get excited too easily, especially about school stuff. That was why I always kept one part of myself hidden from them, the smart part. So, back when I was in kindergarten, my parents didn't even know I could read. And really, it hadn't been that hard for me to keep my smart part a secret. My mom was working for a real estate company, and my dad was running his own business. And then there was the housework and the yard work, plus 3 kids to take care of. Fact, my mom and dad have always been busier than sparrows. I never tried to get attention, and I didn't cause any problems, so everyone left me alone most of the time. I was careful never to give my mom and dad anything to worry about. I spent a lot of time looking at books when I was little, and I'm sure they noticed that, but they must have thought I just liked to look at the pictures. And I also spent a lot of time watching TV. But it was not like I was some kind of weirdo zombie tube-head hermit bookworm, because that would have really made them worry. I had friends at daycare and in the neighborhood, and I liked to play soccer and mess around outside. Mom and Dad had thought I was an ordinary kid. Then I went to school and, and turned into Kindercat. So my mom and dad got worried and they called the principal, Miss Hackney. And then the special education teacher and the guidance counselor got involved, and everyone at school decided I had a learning disability. I could feel how they all started looking at me, and I didn't like that. I didn't want people to think there was something wrong with me. So after 2 weeks, I knew I had to stop being a cat. But I didn't want to start being myself. That seemed dangerous too. Thought about it. An idea I got was so simple. Don't be a cat, be a copycat. I decided that every day I would be like a different kid in my class. I would become a living average of all the other children in the kindergarten. So One Wednesday morning, instead of getting down under the table, I picked out one kid to copy. I started doing whatever Stephen Curtis was doing. Not exactly, but pretty close. And he had no idea I was copying him. When Stephen sat on a rug square and watched Susan help Miss Bridge pick out the right day of the week to hang on the date board, I sat and watched too. When Stephen got out a puzzle, so did I, and I took as long to do my puzzle as it took Stephen to do his. When Stephen began playing with blocks, so did I, and I tried to make my building look sort of like Stephen's. When Stephen sat at a table and tried to draw the letter A with a pencil, I sat down nearby and worked on the letter B with a crayon. I could have written any letter perfectly, and hundreds of whole words too, but I made it look like writing a B was as hard for me as writing that A was for Stephen. The morning went by quickly, and I was amazed at how many different things Stephen did. Kindergarten took on a whole new meaning for me. It had become my laboratory. The next day, I decided to be like Caitlin. She threaded beads, and so did I. She played in the dress up corner, and so did I. When Caitlin colored some butterflies, I did too. And I even joined Caitlin and three other girls in a game of tag during outside recess. It was another educational day for me. Mrs. Bridge was thrilled about the sudden change in my behavior, and so was a special education teacher, and of course, so were my parents. And once I turned into an average kid, the pressure stopped. However, I was just getting started with my research. Helen, Laura, Ron, Kathy, Philip, Jeremy, Karen, James, Kim, Susan, Elliot. I played copycat day after day, always shadowing a different kid. Each day was new and interesting. I felt like I was part of the class, and I liked that feeling. But I also learned that I liked being so smart because by kindergarten I had figured out an important fact about me. I was a genius. The things that most kids found difficult were easy for me. I had seen the other children working hard to learn their letter shapes, working hard to understand the sounds each letter made, working hard just to make their fingers hold a pencil or a pair of scissors. I knew that none of them were thinking the way I was or reading the kinds of things I could read. Megan was the only other kid in my class who could read at all, and just some simple picture books. Day by day, I got a clearer idea of how far ahead I was. That didn't make me think I was better than the other kids, though. The more I got to know them, the more I admired them. I was amazed by all their hard work. I realized that I didn't have to work like they did, and that I never had. School was different for me. Everything was different for me. There were 15 kids in my kindergarten, and each one got a turn being copied. So it was about 2 weeks before I spent another day copying Stephen. And it was wonderful because right away I could tell he had made some progress. Stephen must have been working on his letter shapes because now he could draw A through O perfectly. Except he made his capital G backward every time. I wished I could help Stephen with that, but I knew I didn't dare. Not if I wanted to keep my secret. So I chose D as my backward letter, and I thought, in a couple weeks when it's time to copy Stephen again, maybe he'll have that G turned around. But 2 weeks seemed too long to wait. That's why I followed Stephen the very next day, and then the next 3 days after that, and then all the next week too. I watched everything Stephen did for 9 days in a row, and I heard everything he said. It was an in-depth study. Stephen wasn't one of the smartest kids in the class. I could see that. But Stephen was such a good worker. If he couldn't do something, he was patient and he didn't give up. If something was too hard, Stephen didn't get mad at himself. He simply moved on and then went back to it. And sooner or later, he figured it out. He liked to sit alone sometimes and look out the window or draw shapes with a pencil or a crayon. He didn't look at the pictures in the picture books. He studied them. Also, when Stephen played a game, he always played fair. And the most important thing to me was that during all the time I watched him, Stephen never said or did one mean or angry thing, not once, to anyone, even if someone was mean to him first. Then, one Monday morning, Stephen was absent. Same thing on Tuesday and Wednesday. I almost called his house Wednesday night to make sure he wasn't dying or something because the thought